All right, so here we are with chapter 15, which is mechanisms of pathogenicity. Don't let the word pathogenicity trip you up. I know it's kind of a big word, but all it means is how pathogens make us sick. So that's what this chapter is all about. This chapter is all about how microorganisms that are pathogens, how they actually hurt us, how they damage us, how they make us sick. That's basically what chapter 15 is all about. All right, so the word virulence, you can kind of see the word virus in there, right? So it doesn't refer to viruses, it's just they coined this term virulence to basically mean how bad a pathogen is. So virulence is the degree of pathogenicity, how dangerous is it, how badly can it make us sick, that kind of thing. So there is a mathematical term for it called the ID50. The ID50 is the infectious dose for half the population. That is a measurement of virulence. Just treat these things as vocabulary words. There's not going to be anything, more than that as far as the exam goes. And then portals of entry, it's kind of what it sounds like. A portal of entry is how the pathogen is able to get into your body. Now, in chapter 16, we talk about how the skin is your first line of defense. We talk about things like mucous membranes, lysozyme, and then of course we get into the different, white blood cells. So all of those things are designed to kind of be the guards of the portals of entry, right? So your skin, your mucous membranes, just like keeping the bad guys out, okay? So, that's the whole job of the non-specific immunity is keeping the bad guys out, preventing you from getting sick. Then, of course, anytime that the skin is compromised, so a bite, a cut, a wound of some sort, that is certainly going to become a portal of entry, and that's going to allow pathogens to gain access to your body. That's why when you have a puncture or a wound, very important to clean it and then keep it covered by some sort of bandage, because that's going to kind of take the place of your skin until your skin can actually grow back. So essentially, the way that bacteria is able to, attach and gain entry to our cells is a combination of surface receptors and something called a ligand. A ligand is a molecule on the pathogen that binds to the receptor, and that's what allows the bacteria to basically grab onto our cell. All right, so, know the definition of a ligand, a receptor, biofilm, not a huge part of the test at all. Just a couple of vocabulary words, nothing too crazy, okay? So then the bacteria has to get into our cell. It has to have some way of penetrating the cell so that it can basically harm us or make us sick. That's kind of the whole idea here. So some bacteria use their capsules. And the examples we have here, we've got Streptococcus pneumoniae, Klebsiella pneumoniae, Haemophilus influenza. So those first three, are bacteria that cause different types of pneumonia. Now you can see the word pneumonia in two of them, okay? The third one, Haemophilus influenza, this is actually a misnomer, because I hope you all know influenza is a virus. It is not a bacteria. But when this bacteria was discovered, they thought that it caused the flu. So they named it Haemophilus influenza. So you have Haemophilus, which means blood-loving, and then influenza, the flu. Of course, they were wrong, because we now know that it is a virus that causes the flu, not a bacteria, but they already named the bacteria, so the name just sticks. So it's just one of those things. So the first three are bacteria that cause pneumonia, and they use their capsules to penetrate our cells to make us sick. Then we have Bacillus anthracis, which is, of course, anthrax. And Yersinia pestis is the plague. Literally, the bubonic plague, the Black Plague, the disease that wiped out half of Europe in the Middle Ages. It's that one. So there you go. Okay, so then we have bacteria that use their cell wall to penetrate our cells. Streptococcus pyogenes, we've already talked about a bunch. So that is the causative agent of strep throat, as well as a bunch of other stuff that we'll talk about later. Neisseria gonorrhea is gonorrhea, and then Mycobacterium tuberculosis is tuberculosis. So 3 bacteria that cause, very different diseases, right? Strep throat versus gonorrhea versus tuberculosis. But the thing they have in common is they use their cell wall to get into our cells to harm us. Strep pyogenes, as well as Staph aureus, other species of staph, use enzymes. So now you can see strep pyogenes uses 2, right? You got cell wall and enzymes. I told you on the very first day of class, strep pyogenes, very, very bad. Okay. A lot of people, they do not give the proper respect to strep throat. Strep throat is, first of all, a horrible disease. If you've never had strep throat, then congratulations, because I used to get strep throat all the time when I was in college. It's horrible. It really is very painful, very terrible. But it can also cause lots of other problems. Like I said, we'll talk about later. Okay, this is a very interesting one, at least for me. Antigenic variation. So the ability to actually change and manipulate the antigens in order to confuse the host's immune system. So chapter 17, we talk all about the immune system, okay? And we talk about antigens, which are the foreign material on the pathogen that your immune system recognizes as, foreign. So that's the bad guy. That's the foreign invader. But the flu virus is the best at this. Now, I put it in here just to mention it because, of course, we're only talking about bacteria right now, okay? But I put influenza here because the flu virus is probably the best at antigenic variation. So of course it is a virus, not a bacteria, but in terms of pathogens, the flu virus is probably the pathogen that is the best at doing this. It changes its antigens so quickly and so effectively. This is why you can get a flu shot, you can get the flu vaccine, and you still end up with the flu, because the vaccine that you got, maybe it's for 4 different antigens, but then the flu that makes you sick is, the 8th antigen, right? So we don't have the technology to make a vaccine that covers all possible antigens of the flu virus, because the flu virus can change its antigens so quickly. It's really weird, but it's an interesting, an interesting topic for sure. And then also the causative agent of gonorrhea has that ability, not nearly to the level that the flu virus can do it, but it still has that ability. And then some species of salmonella, as well as E. coli, actually uses components of the cytoskeleton of our cell to penetrate it. So that's kind of weird. It's like using our own cell against us. That's pretty nasty. I mean, that's almost kind of like what viruses do. All right, so so definitely make sure you know all of those, and then you also want to know these. So siderophores are proteins that help the bacteria obtain iron. Okay, so iron is one of those things where no matter what kind of cell you are, you want iron. Okay, so most of our iron is bound to hemoglobin because we use iron to excuse me we use iron to bind oxygen, and then of course hemoglobin carries the oxygen around. So we really need iron. Iron's very important to the human body because we need it in order to have enough oxygen in our body. Bacteria like iron sometimes for that reason, but sometimes for other reasons. But the thing is, it's like this battle over iron, right? So we want our iron, bacteria wants it too. We got to fight for it, right? So bacteria have these special proteins called cytophores that allow them to basically steal our iron from us. The bacterial cell, once it gets inside of our cell, it can just literally cause physical damage. Like the bacteria is like bumping up against our Golgi apparatus, bumping up against our mitochondria. Heaven forbid it gets to the nucleus, right? It can damage the DNA in the nucleus. So just literal physical damage at the cellular level. And then we have toxins. So there are quite a few bacterial pathogens that have the ability to make different types of toxins. Now, we already talked about endotoxin because endotoxin is LPS, or lipopolysaccharide, which is the component of the gram-negative bacteria's cell wall. So gram-negative bacteria have this stuff called endotoxin, which is really just a component of their cell. Exotoxin we'll talk more about in a second. And then also bacteria can hurt us by inducing hypersensitivity reactions, which are essentially the same thing as allergies. So allergies are a big topic in chapter 19, but certainly is related to this whole, immune system unit that we're doing. Okay, so in your book, you have this lovely, wonderful picture comparing exotoxins to endotoxin, okay? Now, just for the purposes of our test, just to make things a bit easier, we're just gonna say, okay, exotoxins are produced by gram-positive bacteria, endotoxins are produced by gram-negative bacteria, okay? We're just going to leave it at that, okay? It's not exactly 100% accurate because, yes, there are definitely gram-negative bacteria who can produce exotoxins as well. We're not going to overcomplicate, okay? So we're just going to say gram-positive is exotoxins, gram-negative is endotoxins, leave it at that, okay? So exotoxins are actual, chemicals that the bacteria produces to make us sick, okay? So that they're an actual product, an actual substance. That's what these little red bubbles are representing here in this picture. So the bacterial cell just literally makes these chemicals, releases them, and these chemicals hurt us or make us sick, okay? Now, endotoxin for gram-negative is different because endotoxin isn't like a product that the bacteria makes. It is part of them. So like the pink within the cell wall, that is the endotoxin. That is LPS. It is a component of the gram-negative bacteria's cell wall. So what happens is when the bacteria dies, or should the bacteria be killed by the immune system, the bacteria is essentially ripped apart and that releases the endotoxin into the body. So it's a very different type of process, okay? It's like when the bacteria dies or it's killed, it's destroyed, that's what releases the endotoxin, okay? So now endotoxin, again, it's a general, we say, oh, gram-negative bacteria is more dangerous than gram-positive, mostly because of the endotoxin. So we say, well, endotoxin is a lot worse than exotoxin, but there's some exotoxins out there that are really horrible. Okay, so it's like, we're just making a generality here. Okay, endotoxin is worse. We're just going to say that. Okay, now the one thing about endotoxin is that it can cause a very high fever, because LPS actually triggers the hypothalamus to raise the body temperature. Literally, that's what a fever is. So if you have an infection with gram-negative bacteria and your white blood cells do their job, which is kill the bacteria, right? Kill the bad guy. But when the immune system kills the gram-negative bacteria, that releases endotoxin, and that makes you really, really sick. So let's just say let's say somebody is sick. Okay, so they're not feeling well. They have a fever of, let's say, like 100.5. Okay, and they're like, oh, I need to, go to the doctor. I feel so sick, blah, blah, blah. Now they go to the doctor. The doctor runs some tests. They could do, a throat culture. They could do like a urine sample, a blood sample. They test it, and hello, gram stain. We talked about it. All right. So let's say they do the gram stain. It comes up as something that's gram negative. So they're like, oh, they have a gram negative infection. Okay. So, right, if the patient is, they're a young child, they're elderly, someone with HIV, someone with cancer, someone who is just not quote unquote regular, normal adult, otherwise healthy, et cetera, it's very possible that the doctor may tell them, all right, you need to go to the hospital. You need to stay at the hospital for a couple of days. You might wonder, well, I'm just sick. I just have a little fever, 100.5. I don't feel well, but I don't feel like I'm terrible. Okay. The doctor may very well do that because the doctor knows, okay, if you have a gram-negative infection and you are, you're not quote unquote a healthy, normal adult, okay, you are probably going to get a lot worse before you get better, especially if the doctor puts you on antibiotics. Because what are antibiotics? We know this already. Antibiotics are medications that kill bacteria, right? Antibiotics, especially back in the day, but still today, they work great, okay? Antibiotics are like a bomb to the bacteria. Just boom, just blow the bacteria up, just kill them. The problem with that is if it's a gram-negative bacteria and you kill a whole bunch of it with antibiotics, that's going to release a lot of endotoxin. Your fever is going to jump up to 102, 103. You're going to get a lot more sick before you can get better. And that's why the doctor may want you to be in the hospital for a couple of days, because you're going to get a lot sicker, especially once you get put on antibiotics. It's this whole, you have to do this balancing act, right? It's like, okay, we want the bacteria to be dead. We want you to get better. But killing the bacteria will also make you sicker in the beginning because of the endotoxin. So this is why gram staining is so important. This is why it's so important to know what the person is sick with. Because if it's gram positive versus gram negative versus a bacteria, not even a virus, not even a bacteria, you have to do different things for that. If it's a virus, antibiotics are useless, right? If it's gram negative and they have a fever, they're probably going to get a higher fever as their body kills the bacteria, as their body fights it off. Okay. So as you can imagine, lots of questions on the test about exotoxins, endotoxins, right? You definitely want to know this. This is probably the biggest topic of chapter 15, and there's quite a few questions on the test about it for sure. So like I said, yes, exotoxins can technically be produced by gram-positive or gram-negative. We're just going to go gram-positive. We're just keep it simple, right? So gram-positive is exotoxin, gram-negative, endotoxin. Let's just leave it at that, make it easy. All right, so toxins are named like this: neurotoxin, cardiotoxin, enterotoxin, right? So if it's a toxin that affects your nervous system, a toxin that affects your heart, a toxin that affects your intestines, that's how they get their name, right? So endotoxin's not like that. It's just endotoxin. There is no other name. It's just LPS is endotoxin, that's it. Exotoxins, they're a whole like class of substances. Okay, so we have some names here. All right, so the only one that I'm going to really test you on is the first one. Okay, so we have botulism toxin, tetanus toxin, cholera toxin. Okay, I've mentioned these diseases in different ways here or there. We're certainly going to talk about all three a lot more once we get to all the different body systems. But these are just examples. Okay, so botulism, you get that from, you know, improperly prepared or improperly preserved foods. Tetanus, you get that from cutting yourself on, you know, like a old rusty piece of metal or something. And then, you know, cholera toxin, you get that from, you know, contaminated water usually. But yeah, these are chemicals that those bacteria produce that make us sick. So botulism toxin, tetanus toxin, cholera toxin, those are all, you know, so botulism is technically a neurotoxin and an enterotoxin. Tetanus is a neurotoxin, cholera, enterotoxin. So there you go. The other ones, don't worry about too much. There's all kinds of them. I mean, you could do your own research on this. There's all kinds of wild and crazy toxins that bacteria can make that make us sick. It's pretty scary, actually. Endotoxin, we've talked about before. I've already told you about it. I've told you about it in this video. I told you about it in chapter 4. So yeah, we know about that. So yeah, it causes very high fever, weakness, aches and pains. It can cause death. It can cause formation of blood clots. It can cause miscarriages. So very, very bad. Okay, just remember that endotoxin is a part of the gram-negative bacteria cell wall. Okay, so we've got Salmonella typhi, which causes typhoid fever. Various different types of bacteria cause urinary tract infections, and then Neisseria meningitidis, which is one of the causes of meningitis. So these are diseases that are linked to endotoxin. Okay, so gram-negative bacteria, you know, those are the diseases that are associated with it. So then you have, I love this chart. I mean, I love charts like this in the textbook. I mean, it gives you so much information, one single chart, exotoxin, endotoxin. Okay, now I'm not going to ask you, you know, I would say I'm not going to ask you a lot, right? You just need to know, obviously, gram-positive, gram-negative, right? One's a chemical that the bacteria produces. The other one is part of the bacteria's cell wall, right? The effects on the body we talked about, so you definitely want to know that. And then the diseases, right? So exotoxin is like gangrene, tetanus, botulism, endotoxin, typhoid fever, UTIs, meningitis. So just the stuff that was previously talked about in the PowerPoint, make sure you know that. This chart is just nice because it just kind of organizes everything in such a lovely way. Okay, so increasing pathogenicity is essentially how harmless bacteria becomes harmful bacteria. So a lot of it has to do with DNA and genetics, okay? Genetic mutations, evolution of bacteria, you know, things like antibiotic resistance, you know, different strains of bacteria that are more dangerous than others. There's different strains of strep throat. There's different strains of gonorrhea, that kind of stuff. Okay, so we don't talk a lot about this in our class. This is more of like a, you know, BIO125 topic, but very, very interesting. So if you want to do some research on your own, read about it in your book a little bit more, plasmids, lysogeny, which relates back to the lysogenic cycle of viruses. Very interesting stuff, and a little scary, because we're talking about bacteria that doesn't hurt us, and then it evolves and changes, and then it becomes bacteria that can hurt us. That's a little scary. All right, now we get to viruses. So totally, completely different topic now. We're done bacteria. Now we're doing viruses. How viruses make us sick, we already know, because we've already talked about the lytic cycle. We've already talked about how viruses, their whole existence, the whole reason that they do what they do is to get inside of our cells, take over our cell, force our cell to make more virus, and then blow the cell up. Okay, so that is what viruses do. They are terrible little things, right? They get in our cell, they take it over, they kill the cell by making the cell explode, and then that releases a whole bunch more virus into our body, and all of those viruses go and infect more cells. This is why, for the most part, we don't have great treatments for viral infections. We have some really, really great vaccines because, the way vaccines work, we've already talked about, but it basically exposes your body to the viral antigens so that your immune system can be like, oh, okay, this is a virus that we need to be ready for. And then when you get the actual infection, your immune system can fight it off and destroy it because it's seen it before. That's the whole basis of vaccine technology. But, a lot of viruses, the flu, the common cold, COVID, coronavirus, chicken pox, that kind of stuff. It's just one of those things you just have to let your body fight it off. It's just you get it, you're sick, your body fights it, your body finally kills it off, and you're all better. And that's really it. We don't have effective ways of dealing with it the way that we have antibiotics for bacterial infections, because it's like, before antibiotics, tons and tons of people would die of strep throat, of staph infections, of pneumonia, other bacterial, lung diseases. It's like, the gastrointestinal things, E. coli, salmonella, vomiting diarrhea, like those things killed tons and tons of people before antibiotics. When antibiotics became prevalent, even in some of the poorest areas on earth, they can still get penicillin. Penicillin is still cheap enough for everybody to get. People don't die of those things anymore. You get sick, you take antibiotics, and you're probably, hopefully, mostly okay. Viruses, nope, doesn't work that way. We don't have stuff that works that way on viruses because they're so different. Okay, remember, I always say how crazy different viruses are compared to even bacteria cells and our cells. So cytopathic effects are the effects that viruses have on our body, basically how viruses make us sick. So some of these we've touched on before, others might be different, okay? So viruses are gonna mess with cellular metabolism. They're going to just literally kill the cell, just make the cell explode. So you have less cells, and less cells are gonna cause problems, right? The development of what are called inclusion bodies. Inclusion bodies are seen in things like rabies and measles and various different types of herpes viruses. They basically just have these little clumps of protein that stop the cell from functioning. So the cell isn't totally completely dead, it's just non-functional. Syncytium development is the gathering up of infected cells into basically a big clump. So what happens is you have a whole bunch of your body cells that are now infected with these viruses, and the cells are sick. And what they do is they get kind of stuck together, and all of these cells kind of form a clump. It's like a clump of dying cells is basically what that is. And that can, certainly cause issues. It's also going to cause like inflammation, because then your body is like, oh no, what is going on here? What is this thing? And, that's going to lead to issues. Production of interferon. We talk about interferon more in chapter 16. Antigenic changes, somewhat similar to this whole idea of antigenic variation. So it can cause changes in how the immune system responds to things. Antigenic changes also can lead to what we call oncogenic viruses, viruses that can cause cancer. So, that is a huge area of research right now, is we know for sure that there are some viruses that can actually cause cancer. Oftentimes, it's related to some sort of thing like these, changes in the DNA, changes in the chromosomes, changes in the antigens. And then another really kind of fascinating concept is the concept of contact inhibition, which is also a connection to cancer, because cancer cells do this too. So cells that are infected with a virus or cancer cells, sometimes there's an overlap. Okay, they lose contact inhibition. Contact inhibition is basically when two cells touch each other, right? So you have like two different cells. It could be skin, it could be muscle, it could be nerve, whatever. They touch each other and they're like, oh, another me. There's another cell right there next to me. Okay, that triggers a response in the cell so that they do not do mitosis. Okay, we call that contact inhibition. So if a cell bumps into another cell, it's like, okay, if I'm bumping into another cell, there must be plenty of cells here. We don't need any more cells. So we don't need to do mitosis. Okay, that's a good thing. What some viruses can do, also a lot of types of cancer does, is it takes that away. So the cells are bumping into each other, but they don't care. They're like, I'm bumping into cells. I don't care. I'm going to divide. And that's really what cancer is. Cancer is out of control cell division. That's what leads to the growth of a tumor. A tumor is an organ that should not be there, made up of a whole bunch of cancer cells, right? So there's definitely a connection here with contact inhibition, viruses, and cancer. A lot of research being done about these topics. Pretty interesting stuff. Okay, and then just real quick, different pathogens that are eukaryotic cells. So fungus that makes us sick, it's usually some sort of toxin. And I'm telling you, fungus is really, really good at this, okay? They can make all kinds of different chemicals, all kinds of different toxins, toxins that can cause, LSD-like effects, toxins that can lead to cancer, toxins that can, toxins that just, they make you throw up, but you're fine. You just like, you eat the mushroom, it makes you sick, you throw up, and then you're okay. There's other mushrooms, you eat them, and they literally paralyze you and kill you within seconds. It's crazy the different toxins that these, fungus can produce. And then protozoa, different types of parasites. Remember, we're talking about a eukaryotic cell. These things are much, much larger than bacteria. So if you get a protozoal parasite inside of you and it gets into your cell, just the nature of it being there is going to cause damage and probably cause the cell to explode, which, lysis, because you're talking about a parasite that's probably almost as big as your own cell. So it gets in there and it just like divides a couple times and boom, your cell's just dead. So usually that's how protozoal parasites hurt us, is just by killing our cells. Sometimes there's also antigenic variation, something we've already talked about. Parasitic worms. We haven't talked a lot about this yet, so this is a little bit of a newer topic for us. Elephantiasis is the blocking of lymph circulation, which is going to cause really, really bad cell damage, as well as really bad edema or swelling. And then there's some algae that can actually make us sick by producing neurotoxins, enterotoxins, somewhat similar to like what fungus does. It's just that, you know, we are a lot more likely to come into contact with fungal pathogens, not really algae. I mean, algae, you have to be doing a lot of swimming in like lake or ocean. Like, you know, you got to be in the water a lot and be consuming that water to really be, you know, consuming algal toxins. Okay. One thing though is if you eat a lot of clams or oysters, because clams and oysters, they're kind of like, you know, the cleansers of the ocean. So clams and oysters will feed off of this toxic algae, and that is their food. Like that's actually kind of how they clean the ocean. They're known as filter feeders. The problem is their food makes humans sick. So if you eat a lot of clams or a lot of oysters, okay, that could actually make you pretty sick. Like that can, you know, you might even call it food poisoning. It's not technically food poisoning. We'll talk about what food poisoning is later. But yeah, just by eating a lot of them, because their food, to them, it's yummy. To us, it makes us sick. So just one of those things. Okay, now portals of exit is how they get out of us, right? So the pathogens want to get out of us to go make other people sick. Oftentimes, the portals of exit are exactly the same as the portals of entry. Not all the time, you know, because like if you have a cut or a wound and that's how they get in you, you know, you'd have to go and like cut somebody else to give it to them, right? So you don't do that. But obviously, coughing, sneezing, vomiting, you know, sex, you know, that's how they get out of you to make someone else sick, right? We talked about disease transmission. We talked about things like contact transmission and vector transmission and droplet transmission. That's what we're talking about. I mean, that's it. That is the portal of exit. So the portal of exit is how they get out of you to go make someone else sick. Should make sense. And here we go. So this is just the last thing, the summary of the whole chapter, right? So they gotta, you know, get into you, then they gotta get into your cell, then they gotta hurt you, and then they gotta get out of you, right? So that's like a summary of everything. Certainly you wanna make sure you know all these terms, you wanna make sure you know the details that I've just talked about in this PowerPoint. And that is it for the chapter 15 material.